What's up, people? Welcome to the Casual Corner. This your boy DJ, and I'm gonna go over a brief discussion over a topic I've been wanting to go cover for a while now, and that is the topic of video game remakes. Now, what I want to talk about is not really go into what games like I feel are the best remakes, but more so like how I think it should, how these gaming companies should go forward with remaking certain games and their decision process and so on and so forth, right? So of course, with that being said, we've been having a lot of remakes of, I would say, games that are already popular. For instance, of course, you got Resident Evil, and what other games we got? I think there's some other. Oh, and we're getting right now it's just Resident Evil, and we're getting Dead Space that's getting remade. What else is getting remade? But can't call off the top of my head. I know there's some other ones, but I ain't gonna get into that. Get off subject too much, but what I'm getting into is that there are other games out there that have not had a decent remake for them in a while. If they're gonna do remakes, might as well do remakes of more old school classic games that haven't, get to knock the dust off these titles that haven't seen action in like some years. And when I say years, I mean like years. I would say like 5, maybe like 10 years. And being that I'm in my, like, I would say late 30s and stuff, yeah, mid to late 30s, that's a long time. But not gonna say that the remakes for the Resident Evil genre are bad or anything like that. That's definitely not the point of this video. Because I like what they're doing with that, revitalizing, getting more people into the Resident Evil franchise. I mean, especially since as of right now, they want people to not feel like they have to play. If you haven't played like the older Resident Evil games, and we got newer consoles, these remakes will bring these new players into the Resident Evil franchise. Of course, with some changes being made or whatever, none of that really matters. Just basically business perspective, you bring these new people in on top of catching them up to the newer Resident Evil games like 7 and The Village, But my thing is, if they're gonna remake some of these games, ongoing franchises, I feel like they should also try to focus on games that, I know business perspective, it would be a risk, but I feel if given the right promotion and the backing and of course the main thing, the right development or company or whatever, these games could actually be brought back to life. Like for instance, we got on the Tomb Raider game. In fact, the games did really well. In fact, they got another Tomb Raider coming out, I believe, next year. Don't quote me on it, but I played the first 3. They're all pretty good. Like how they did the remake for that, and I also played the old ones back when I was in high school. Lara Croft, big when she first came out with her Tomb Raider games. Of course, she was a sex symbol and all that, and Indiana Jones is pretty big with the whole thing. If you like the Uncharted games, of course you like that's where that started with her. So that's pretty good. And then she had her franchise ran for a very long time, all the way up until the stealth games came into play, like Siphon Filter, Metal Gear Solid, and Splinter Cell. That's kind of like around the time when the Tomb Raider games kind of fell off. That was more exciting, something new to play. Stealth games kind of took over the gaming industry for a big while, especially when Metal Gear came around. That was that stealth was everything. But so back to subject, remakes. There's a lot of other games that can be remade. Another example would be like Final Fantasy VII. They remade that, although they remade it in a direction I'm not too cool with. I don't agree with, but I'm happy that they did it regardless. We get to see Cloud and the gang in a new light. new gameplay, fights all cool. Wish it was more so like, style like an Advent Children. That movie pretty cool. Had Cloud flying all over the place, and I know you're probably gonna be like, hey, but he could, if that's what you want, play the City. And nah, though the City games are trash, and nah, that if you're trying to get and that's more akin to like a fighting game anyways, and I think they did that horribly with those games too. But those games could act, in my opinion, I might do a video on that next, because that game was a waste. But that's neither here nor there. We'll get on that later on in the future sometime. But like other games they could remake, I feel like if they're gonna remake something, it should be a game that ain't been around for a while and needs to come back into the spotlight, that could actually do it. In fact, they kind of did that with Prince of Persia, and I don't know if anybody played the Prince of Persia games. On the first three, they were stellar, did super well. It was open shut book. The first game revealed us the world of the prince and his time traveling adventures. Then they closed it on a very epic climax with the two thrones, and that was beautiful. Loved it, every bit of it. Then they made a remake later on down the road where they called it Prince of Persia, but the only thing they shared between the remake and the old one was the name. You still had some gameplay mechanics like rewind in time, but other than that, the game was completely different, and it did well. I mean, it played well. I don't think it, it didn't. I don't think it had mixed reviews. I believe. I think it failed. I'm not too sure, but one thing I do know is never got a sequel. And if it had a DLC that hinted at a sequel, but it never went nowhere. But I wish it did. It was a good ass game. But but games like that, that was a good one. Even though it failed, it was still a good remake. And of course, what else we got? Oh, and they're supposed to be making a sequel to Beyond Good and Evil. I don't know if a lot of people played that game, but a couple years back, they started going real heavy into developing a new one. They even had gameplay showing off the game and all that stuff. It looked good, and it looked like they was pretty far along with the game too. But that was like 3 years ago, maybe even 4, and we have not heard anything from that game at all. So just like with all these other games, after a while they kind of like just fall off and disappear into the void and what they call development hell. So who knows when we'll see that again. Hopefully, if we do see it again, we have more of a finished product and a definitive date for when it's coming out, because from what they showed, the latest thing they showed, the game looked pretty good. And if you ever played Beyond Good and Evil, you'll know it's a good game. Although this sequel looked totally different, and it looked like a vast improvement over the first one. But also on to next. Like I was saying before, there have been some bad remakes. Well, I wouldn't say bad, but remakes I don't agree with. Like, if you're gonna do a remake, I feel like if you're gonna remake a game, try to make with the lore. You can veer a little bit off course, but not to the point where it doesn't make sense. And when I talk about that, that's when I go into games like the Castlevania Lords of Shadows games. And although those games had good gameplay, being that I'm a Castlevania buff and I've played most of the ones, most of the Castlevanias that came out before, like, of course, based off what you probably like, he probably played that Symphony of the Night game. Yeah, like Castlevania, Symphony of the Night, Metroidvania games, loved all of them. I mean, that Castlevania, it's in the name, Metroidvania. They started the whole 2D scrolling, running around, collecting shit, genre. And those games are pretty good. Love them all. In fact, thing also about those Castlevania games, their lore is pretty deep and rich. So, in fact, and if you ever watched the Netflix show, although there were some changes made, mostly it stayed the same. And if you played the games, you had great. You really liked the show. They did justice to the fans of Castlevania. Whereas Lords of Shadow, I feel it did not. It just more so was a Dracula power fantasy, which is weird to me because if you played, I forget the name of the Castlevania, not Judgment. Judgment was the fighting game one, but there's a one, I think it was on N64, and that's the one you play as the original Belmont, and in the timeline for that, Castlevania, that game had you going into the origins of Dracula and the vampire killer whip and what started the whole feud between the Belmonts and Dracula. Dracula. Well, in Lords of Shadow, they just threw all that shit out the window. The first Belmont, I guess, he becomes Dracula. He also destroys the vampire killer whip, or a whip. I think it's one of them, the whip or whatever. But even with that being said, I was okay with it. I didn't care about that. I was like, okay, still a good, cool game. I'll let it slide. But then the next game is where the biggest offense took place, and that's where they fused two of the most popular characters in, well, I would say in top 5 most popular characters of the Castlevania franchise, Alucard and Trevor Belmont. Fused both those guys into the same character. So I guess Trevor Belmont was, I forget that the Dracula, wherever Belmont he was first name, he had a son that was Trevor, and I guess at some point he made him into a vampire and he renamed himself Alucard. And I was like, that hit me some kind of way. And if you watch Netflix shows, like, why would they even do that? They're not, these guys are two completely different people, completely different stories, completely different motivations. Like, it just doesn't fit well, and it doesn't sit well with me at all. So, but as story wise, it sucked, but gameplay wise, it did what it was supposed to do. It was a God of War clone, and of course, at the time when those games came out, God of War was kind of big, especially the first Castlevania Lords of Shadow game. You know, God of War was taking over. Hack and slash games were all the buzz, so you know that was the thing. So that did its thing, but there are other games that could be remade that I feel would bring a lot of hype and, I guess, business-wise money and revitalize some old franchises back. Like, one franchise I know people will get kicking, that people love to play again, and new players will really like to, would be the Legacy of Kain game, Soul Reaver especially. Back when I was in high school, I played that game a lot. I only played the 2 of them, the ones Soul Reaver side of the games with Raziel, and I think the one after that, which was called Legacy of Kain, Soul Eater. But those games are pretty cool, you know, vampire stuff. Yeah, a pretty badass game too. It had deep lore, and I feel like they, you know, remade those games. I think that franchise had more than 2 games too. There was the 2 I played, I think it was on the PS2, and then there was the ones before that. They were like more PC games, I believe, and they were pretty cool as well. Probably like 6, maybe more games. 6 or more games, maybe. I could be wrong. I'm just guessing at this point. I'm not looking nothing up, but I'm just going off memory. But they had a bunch of games, and they had a very strong following too. To this day, in fact, I think I heard a rumor or seen a rumor on the waves of the internet that there was possibly a remake being made for that game. And if that's the case, that's cool as fuck, and can't wait to see that happen. Also, we're going to jump into the world of fighting games here. And when the Xbox One made its debut, of course, Killer Instinct was the game to play. And to be honest, even though Killer Instinct, I know a lot of people like Killer Instinct. I mean, it was okay for me, but I never really cared too much. I know, like, although it did have a lot of cool guest characters and stuff, like this one did, to keep it alive, but I think I played other fighting games and that I liked, that I think that should have older ones, that should have been brought back before that game. And of course, Capcom vs SNK 2 is one of those games. Last time I played that game was around the days of the Marvel vs Capcom games. Love that game to death. Still to this day, I play that on my computer. Love it. Oh, it's still one of my top, I would say, well, it used to be top 3, now it's like top 10. But it's still it's in my top 10 category games. It's definitely one of my top 5 favorites. So, also, Rival Schools. And of course, Street Fighter 5 recently just started, had the DLC with Akira in it. And her, her got Big Bro Daigo coming in with her. And that's pretty cool and stuff. But, that's just one character. And of course, also, before Akira even came in, they had the cameo for Tiffany in the background of the beach stage. And that was cool too. She's chilling on the beach and stuff. It'll be, I love that game. Rival Schools is tight as fuck. And basically, if you had Marvel vs. Capcom had a baby with Tekken, so a 3D Marvel vs. Capcom, right? And with the influence of, anime, Saturday morning cartoon stuff, super powered teams with attitudes battling out to see the strongest, and the forces of good versus forces of evil type shit. And it had a tight ass intro too. The intro for the game was tight, and they had two of them. In fact, Project Justice. Didn't have a lot of time on that game, although that game was cool because I think you could have 3 people instead of the 2 in the first game. You could only have 2 people on the team, or I could be wrong. I think you could do or maybe it was just the supers. Like you could have 2 people do a super, and then in the third one you could have triple team supers. I get it wrong, but I know it's 2 and 3. But the game was that's beyond the point. The game was tight as shit, and that game should come back. But more so than all of that, Bloody Roar. That whole franchise loved every one of those games. I mean, what's not to love about freaking werewolves and shit? Not just werewolves. You got were-bats, you got were-gorillas, you got were-penguins, things. I don't know what some of those guys were, but those games were tight as shit. That was flashy, and I think that game with the power of these next gen fucking consoles and PCs and stuff, those games could actually look amazing. In fact, shit, they could bring back Battle Arena Toshinden too. Yeah, and some of those other games. There's a lot of games out, especially the fighting game variety that I played that could be remade, brought back to light. But yeah, but that's my whole take on the video game remake situation, and hopefully that's how things go in the future. They get some of these other games I'm talking about more time in the light. Oh, another game they could remake that was ahead of its time was Heavenly Sword. That game was definitely ahead of its time, and being now in this day and age where female protagonists are starting to, get pushed up there, I think Noriko would be. This is a great time for her to come back. That game was badass, and she was literally a god. And I don't know if anyone ever played that game. On the fighting on that game, and the little signature takedowns was insane and gruesome. She liked to attack a lot of nudies on that game. She's stomping on dudes' balls and stuff. And yeah, it was a crazy game. Good stuff, but. Alright guys, that's all I have to say about that, and I'll catch you later next time. Be ready to see another video. Plan on making another video on The Surge. More like an AMV than anything, but yeah, I might drop that sometime later on this week. Just be on the lookout for that, alright? Alright, peace.